In 1987, the southwest of Puerto Rico was rocked by an earthquake that shook homes and left several without power. Many residents reported hearing a massive, very loud explosion around the time of the earthquake. While officials attempted to get to the bottom of it, UFO researchers in Puerto Rico soon began receiving reports from locals living around the quake area who described seeing all manners of strange things, including black helicopters and UFOs. Puerto Rican-based researcher Jorge Martin traveled to the area, where he spoke to several people who went into detail about the bizarre activity which had transpired in the days and weeks after. Martin also managed to track down a police officer with a very interesting story to tell. Just 2 days before the earthquake, he was out fishing with a coworker when they observed something that left them so disturbed and frightened that at least one of them moved away from the area. In this video, I will be diving into the strange events in Laguna, Cartagena. On May 31st, 1987 at 1:55 p.m., houses were damaged when an earthquake rocked the people living in the southwest of Puerto Rico. At the same time, residents experienced a loud explosion which seemed to come from the underground. Thankfully, despite the destruction, no lives were lost. Various news outlets carried first-hand reports from locals living in the towns of Cabo Rojo, Lejos, and Mayas, where the earthquake was felt the strongest. In many reports, the witnesses described how the ground shook up and down for some moments as they all heard the explosion. Several houses and buildings were damaged. Originally, the quake's epicenter was pinpointed by Puerto Rican seismologists at 81,000 feet deep under Laguna, Cartagena, a lagoon located between the towns of Lejo and Cabo Rojo. But the next day, the report was changed, stating that the explosion and tremors epicenter was located out at sea to the west of Puerto Rico, in the Mona Channel. Puerto Rican-based UFO researcher Jorge Martin became interested when he got word that on Sunday, June 1st, 1987, at about 10 p.m., the day after the quake, a huge unidentified flying object was seen hovering over Laguna, Cartagena. Many people, residents in the communities all around the site, watched from the windows of their homes as a strange object hovered stationary in the evening sky, as if surveying the damage. The very next day, Martin and his team immediately went to the area and set about interviewing the various witnesses, as well as anyone else who was willing to talk. The more he dug, the deeper the mystery became. One of the first people he spoke to was Carlos Maceda, who recalled, "I was looking towards the Sierra Bermesa and the Laguna, and all of a sudden I saw two very big and bright stars or lights that were coming down very slowly side by side. I called my wife and got my binoculars. The lights were at the end of something very big that looked like a huge metallic-looking silvery pipe. It was cylindrical with two big balls of greenish-white light at each end. On the object's underside there was something like a revolving reddish light." Haiti Alvarez, Machado's wife, was also interviewed by Martin. She recalled, "They were like two very big stars, the size of a $50 coin, joined by a long metallic big pipe with lights underneath it." Rosa Acosta, also a resident of the same community, told Martin, "It was really big. I was seeing it from about 3 kilometers away, and I could still see it about 6 inches long and from the distance. It was incredible. The thing came down and hovered there, motionless over Laguna, Cartagena, in the air. Then about 15 minutes later, it flew up and disappeared to the south behind the Sierra Bermesa. This isn't new here. These mysterious lights and artifacts have been seen here for years, especially in that place. There have been occasions in which I've been in my hammock, here in the terrace, and all of a sudden a bright light is shining on me from above. When I look up, one of these things, something saucer-shaped, is over me and shining a bright white light on me. This has happened a couple of times. Why they do it, I don't know, and why me, I wonder about it." Carlos Munoz, a young man present during the interviews, explained to Martin that his entire family had been observing strange flying objects around Cartagena. "About a year ago, 1986, one night all of us at home saw a very big platform, something that came down from the sky and remained motionless there over Laguna, Cartagena. It had very bright yellow and green lights, and many smaller luminous objects were coming out from the underside of that platform and flying away in different directions. They kept going in and out from that thing. After some minutes, the smaller objects entered the big one, and it flew away and disappeared up in the sky. It happens regularly, and always over the Sierra Bermesa and the Laguna. Curiously, the object returned for 2 more consecutive nights to that place, always at 10 to 10:30 p.m., remaining motionless over the Laguna. Regional radio stations began receiving calls from excited listeners describing their sighting of this strange object. Martin and his team were intrigued that most of the witnesses claimed that the objects flew away over and behind the Sierra Bermesa, next to the Laguna Cartagena. They decided to travel to the sector behind the ridge, the Oliveira sector, and the garbage dump area there, in the municipality of the town of Lejos. While investigating, they discovered several perfect, clearly defined circular marks in a field next to the Sierra Bermesa, in a land sector that belonged to Mr. Fidel Avil, a landowner and businessman. When measured, most of the circles were 35 to 40 feet in diameter and perfectly defined by a rim 3 feet wide, a rim almost totally devoid of grass, in which the soil seemed to have been baked by a great heat effect and become harder than the soil outside the rim. Only the soil inside the rim seemed to be affected, different. The small quantity of grass still in the rim's area was totally dried up and dead. When asked by Martin and his team, the neighbors seemed surprised by the circles, as they had not noticed them before. The circles seemed to have formed there overnight. The neighbors had no idea who could have made them or why, though they did indicate that for several nights, beginning the night after the earthquake and explosion, they had seen strange lights and a very big object with many colored lights hovering in the sky and flying over the Sierra Bermesa in the direction of Cabo Rojo and the Laguna on the other side of the Sierra. The descriptions of the objects seen by them were similar to the ones given by the witnesses on the other side of the Sierra. Mr. Roosevelt Acosta, his brother Herberto, and several relatives who lived in the Oliveira sector all attested to this, also indicating that on some occasions neighbors there, as well as themselves, had observed strange small beings which seemed to have a faint glow to their bodies and which disappeared quickly whenever they were approached by the witnesses. On one occasion, Mrs. Dolan Acosta, another resident of the Oliveira sector, was standing on her balcony when a bright beam of light suddenly came from above and engulfed her. It was a very bright white light, she told him. It was coming from above the balcony ceiling. There was a hole in the ceiling, and as I looked up, there was a thing up there. Something like a big ball of light, and a bright beam of light was coming out of it and shining on me. When I looked at myself, I couldn't believe it. I could see my bones. It was as if I was looking at an X-ray plaque. I could see the bones in my fingers, my arms, my body, even my toes. That object was up there, and I could hear a soft sound coming from it. Something like air being ejected out from it. It then left, but for some minutes I could still see myself like that. My sister Eunice came out from her room to see what was causing the bright light, and we both could see the inside of our bodies, our bones. When I looked at her, she had no eyes. I could clearly see her empty eye sockets, and she saw the same thing on me. After about 5 minutes, we were back to normal. Dolan and her sister insisted to Martin that they experienced no ill effects afterwards. Regarding the circles, Fidel Avil, owner of the land where they appeared, told Martin, "I've lived here for 50 years and I've never seen anything like this. Those circles appeared there overnight after the explosion and the tremor." Avils owned and operated a small food store in Oliveras. In an interesting turn, 3 circles appeared behind his store the morning they interviewed him. His son Philo, who spent time at the store helping out, explained that on the morning the circles appeared, a young man came into the store. He was nervous and agitated. He explained to Philo that he was camping with some friends in the wooded area further down the road. At around 3 a.m., he had gone for a ride on his motorcycle. As he passed in front of the store, he observed 3 strange luminous objects hovering next to the ground behind the store. He told Philo that they were, quote, round, soundless, and looked like upside-down dishes, with bright yellowish light emanating from them. Upon sighting them, the young man became frightened and he quickly fled the area. When Martin and his team arrived, they found 8 circles. Within 2 days, there were now 12 of them. Intrigued, they talked to their friends Captain Luis Azari, an airline pilot with many years of experience, and Julio Cesar Rivera, a flying student. They agreed to take Martin and a team member up in Azari's plane to fly over the area and let them take some photos. As we did it, we were surprised by what we saw. There were 38 of those circles there in the terrain. They looked totally symmetrical and tended to be in pairs. Some days later, we took some samples from the soil in the circles and sent them to the Agricultural Extension Division program in Mayas, a major city next to Cabo Rojo, in order to check if a type of mushroom that we found at the place could have formed the circles. But it was certified by the program cytologist that type of fungus involved couldn't have formed them. Also, the soil sample showed that the pH in the soil had changed, but only in the rims area. The other samples taken from inside and outside the circles were totally normal. As Martin and his team continued to speak to the witnesses, he began to uncover some very strange things pertaining to the earthquake itself. Several witnesses in the Magoya sector next to the Laguna stated that the night prior to the explosion and quake, they had observed a strange big, quote, red ball of fire, which flew and made several turns over the Laguna and then descended in a controlled and slow fashion, making a buzzing sound, and disappeared slowly into the waters of Laguna Cartagena. At 2 a.m., many residents of Magoya were awakened by a very strong and brilliant white light that was coming in through all the windows and openings of their houses. Curious about it, the neighbors looked out and were amazed by the sight of a huge flying saucer-type craft that was hovering low over the Laguna, as if searching for something there. According to them, the craft was covered by a bright white light, and it was circling the area very slowly. After about 2 minutes, the craft left, disappearing in the sky very fast. The next day at 1:55 p.m., the quake and explosion occurred. Martin found the whole thing very curious. We must remember that the epicenter of the tremor and the explosion was originally officially pinpointed by the authorities at 81,000 feet deep under the Laguna Cartagena. An unidentified object is seen entering the Laguna. Another unidentified object is seen late at night hovering and circling over the Laguna, as if looking for something there. And the next day, an explosion that rocks the whole region is felt, having originated in the Laguna Cartagena. What really happened in that place? After the quake, numerous jet fighters, helicopters, and large AWAC-type radar planes were observed, constantly flying low and circling over the Laguna, as if searching for something. Fishermen and several locals observed strange objects going in and out from the sea at the coastline, as well as hovering over the Sierra Bermesa and the Laguna Cartagena. Also, after the explosion, several large cracks were seen in the land in different places of Lejo and Cabo Rojo. Many people describe that a bright cobalt blue colored smoke issued out with force from these crevices. Pedro Vargas, a resident in Sector La 22 of La Hotuna, Cabo Rojo, a teacher, told Martin, "I saw it clearly. Some cracks appeared in the ground in my yard, and this blue smoke came out from them with force. This frightened me and my family. I feared that maybe a volcano was forming in my land." Some people from the Maya Agricultural and Mechanical Arts College, part of the University of Puerto Rico complex specialized in engineering and agricultural techniques, came to check on what happened, but strangely, they refused to take samples of the residue of the blue smoke and powder that remained on some of the plants in the ground. That was strange because they said they were investigating what happened. Then why would they refuse to take the samples and analyze them? I still don't understand their behavior. The bright cobalt blue smoke was also observed rising from the Laguna Cartagena. Carlos Medina, together with other residents of the Mayo community, stated that after the explosion there was a bright blue smoke issuing out from the lagoon, and the place was quickly cordoned off by a strange unidentified group of men. Some were dressed in camouflage fatigue military uniforms, with their ID tags covered with tape labels. Some were dressed as civilians in plain clothes or elegant suits, but with rubber boots up to their knees. Others were dressed in white head-to-toe coverall anti-contamination type suits or hazmat suits. The men dressed in the anti-contamination suits had thick, dark gray gloves and boots on, and were taking samples in large translucent canisters of the lagoon's water, mud, and soil, as well as of the plants. According to the witnesses, these men had a type of radios that they were using to check something in the water. The descriptions of the radios reminded Martin of radiation counters. The military and the men in the suits prevented anyone from getting close to the place, explaining that special personnel were there to, quote, investigate whatever happened here, but that no one was allowed to go in the area. Carlos Medina and several others explained that on the second day, a dark green military helicopter with no markings was brought to the area, and a big metallic ball with something that looked like electronic equipment on it was lowered into the water, attached to a very long metallic line that was attached to the helicopter. The personnel there seemed to be looking for something. The witnesses also noted that there were a number of beige-colored vans and Bronco-type vehicles with small revolving parabolic-type antennas on top of them in the area. Zalma Ramirez de Perez, who was, at the time, one of the owners, together with her family, of part of the land where the Laguna Cartagena is located, went to the site with her sister to see what happened, because they had seen a bright blue smoke rising out from the lagoon's water. In the same area, Carlos Medina and the others observed it. Several American men, they guessed agents dressed in dark suits with a rectangular red tag on the right side of their suits, approached Zalma and her sister and ordered them to leave the place at once. When they explained that they didn't have to go anywhere, as it was their land, the two men told them they didn't care, and that they had to leave, and that they were, quote, trying to find out what happened here. Martin found it interesting that the agents had told Medina the same thing, that they were trying to determine what happened there, though officials declared that it was just an earthquake. Or was it? These men, according to Zalma and her sister, were tall, Caucasian, blonde, and dressed in really nice suits, but wearing, as already mentioned, what seemed to be black rubber boots. They also had metallic silvery briefcases with them. Zalma explained to Martin that she and her family had been seeing flying saucer-type objects zipping in and out of the water of the lagoon pretty consistently since 1956. At first they were very bright and luminous, and as they came out you could define more clearly their shape. They were disc-shaped, silvery, metallic, with translucent domes on top, and they had many beautiful colored lights all around them. They made a whooshing sound. You could see people, figures inside the domes, because on some occasions, when they came out, we yelled at them, and they would stop in the air in front of us. We tried to report the things we were seeing to the media, but no one would pay attention to us, so we just let it be. In fact, my brother, Quentin, now dead, one night back in 1964, yelled at them that he wanted to know how they were, to see if they were really from outer space, as people said, and that same night he had an encounter with them. He went to bed and suddenly felt an urge to go to the Laguna. He got dressed, got in his Jeep, and drove toward Laguna Dirt Lane, to the back of the Laguna. Getting off the Jeep, he saw two figures approaching him from the Laguna. They were tall white men, about 6 to 7 feet tall, men with fair blonde hair, and dressed in one-piece, tight-fitting silvery suits. Zalma told Martin that as they approached him, her brother became frightened and asked them to stop. They smiled at him and returned to the lagoon. The next day he told his family of what happened. He feared that they would ridicule him. He never spoke of the beings again, but the sister suspected that he had later interactions with them, as he would occasionally disappear into the Laguna, not returning until the next morning. He never explained what he was doing, only that he was with his friends. The day after the earthquake, a green military unmarked helicopter landed on the top of the hills of the Sierra Mesa, just behind the residence of Milton Velez. Velez, his wife, and children all observed several men dressed in green military fatigues and boots and wearing black berets get off the helicopter and start scanning the soil all over the hill with instruments which looked to Milton like metal detectors. "They look like special forces people to me," Velez told Martin. "They were looking for something up there. After an hour or so, they left in the helicopter without any explanation." Velez, his family, and some neighbors watched as luminous saucer-shaped objects came down from the sky and hovered next to a radar blimp which had been installed there by the government. After some minutes, the UFOs left the area quickly. This started to become a common event, Velez noted. Due to the many sightings of luminous objects and the explosion, authorities attempted to offer an official explanation. Seismologists stated that the anomalous sightings were due to energy being released into the atmosphere from geological faults deep underground. According to them, the friction in these faults produced the lights. They happily dismissed the UFO sightings as misidentifications by unknowing witnesses. Martin found the official explanations to be, well, lacking. The real situation was that many of the sightings had to do with well-defined solid metallic objects that flew over the areas in an intelligently controlled fashion. Most of the UFOs were saucer-like and cigar-shaped objects. Others were described as balls of light or balls that also flew in a controlled manner. Louis Bonnet of Hormungus, about 20 miles away from Cabo Rojo, was the adventurous type. He spoke to Martin. Apparently he had been intrigued by the incidents in Laguna, Cartagena spoken of by locals, and he decided to visit the place late at night to see if he could see anything strange there. After the explosion, some days later, I went there to see what was happening. I was walking in the darkness, and suddenly someone touched me in the back. That scared me, and I let a foul word out. Whoever it was responded in English and asked me who I was, what I was doing there, that I had to leave at once or I'd get into a problem. I told him, an American blonde man dressed in a fine black suit with a tie, that I was investigating what happened there, and he ordered me to get out from the place, stating that they, whoever they were investigating if whatever happened there was something natural or something else. I didn't want any problems, so I left. While most of the accounts Martin collected involved what happened in the days after the quake, at least one man, a police officer, had a story that involved odd things that happened in the days leading up to it. His account, if true, lends a sinister note to this already strange and disturbing tale. According to this officer, it was May 29, 2 days before the earthquake. He and another officer had gone to the lagoon to do some fishing on their day off. His friend was the first to notice movement and smoke in a slope on one of the hills of the Sierra Bermesa. Intrigued, he set down his fishing rod and climbed up the hillside to have a look. The main witness remained fishing, not thinking much of it. It was at this point his friend observed several men dressed in silvery coverall-type suits, including gloves and boots, checking the area with what looked like Geiger counters. He immediately alerted the primary witness to come and look, and so he dropped his fishing rod and quickly climbed up the hillside. He joined his friend, and together they saw another group of men, dressed in similar attire, hauling 3 big rolls of thick black electrical or communications rubber-covered cables several inches wide in big black trucks. The men then entered one of the cables in Lagoon's water, specifically in the area free from grass and foliage, the area where Zalma indicated she observed most of the UFOs come out of. The other trucks entered a lane in one of the cattle ranches there to the right and was lost from their sight. At that moment, a helicopter appeared as if from nowhere, and someone ordered them through a speaker to stop where they were and get down the hill at once. The policeman, whose name he asked Martin not to reveal, noted, "It was a big black helicopter with no markings. Someone inside of it ordered us to stop, and they said they knew we were armed. How did they know that we had our guns with us? I still can't understand that. Maybe they had some type of equipment in the helicopter that enabled them to know about it. We came down from the hill and they landed next to us very fast. 2 men dressed in black jumpsuits and armed jumped down from the helicopter and asked my friend to come closer. They were white with dark hair and mustaches, Hispanic looking. He joined them and came back very upset with a worried look. Now we are in trouble, he said. They are federal people, agents. I told him not to worry, and we both went to the helicopter. They asked what we were doing, and we explained that we were policemen off-duty fishing at the place. They answered in perfect Spanish with a Puerto Rican accent, "You can't go up there. This is a restricted place under the U.S. federal government. We are doing an experiment here." What type of experiment, they never said. Martin noted that this statement from the helicopter official was a lie, because the area was not leased to the U.S. federal government by an agreement between the Puerto Rican local government and the U.S. Fishing and Wildlife Service until August 8, 1989. They took us away to an area between two hills in the Sierra, and there was a camping tent. A tall white man dressed in a military suit came out from the tent. He seemed to be an American officer. This man talked to them, and we perceived that he was asking them why they had taken us there. He seemed very concerned and annoyed by our presence. According to the officer, after talking with the military men, one of the men approached them, and the next thing they were aware of was that they were laying face down on the ground on the dirt road that went out from the Laguna, Cartagena to Road 101. As he was coming to, the officer explained that he heard a man say in perfect Spanish, "Hey, they are waking up, let's go." Then some men got into a car and drove away very quickly. Both officers slowly woke up. They were both dazed and remained sitting there on the dirt road for some time. Eventually they were able to compose themselves enough to get up and leave the area. They never returned. Curiously, sometime later, the friend, who was deeply, deeply disturbed by what had happened, packed his things and moved to New York. He insisted that he would not likely ever return to Puerto Rico. "I don't know what happened," the officer told Martin. "Those men did something to us, because we can't remember what happened after the man with the military officer came to us at the tent camp, only that we woke up in the dirt road and in a dazed state. It was as if we had been drugged and taken there. Now I can say that. I'm sure they drugged us somehow, but why? We didn't see anything important, I think. Only these men in the silvery suits with the cables going into the water. Who knows? Maybe that is what they didn't want us to see, and the military officer. And then some days later, the explosion and the earthquake there. All this is weird. Very weird."